May is known as Mental Health Awareness Month, and for the last couple of weeks, we've had a great two-part interview with Brooke Ewert. This week, we pick up again with looking at how Christian faith speaks to mental health issues. Hello, everyone. This is Rev Brad, and you're listening to the Soccer Chaplains United podcast from the Touchline. Today on the pod, how can a person know what God's will is for their life? Oftentimes we come to a crossroads, or we're in a rut or a slump. How can we know which way to go, what decision to make, or what step to take? We're going to look at one of the biggest anxiety-producing spaces of life, and that is trying to figure out and make decisions about the future. So stay tuned. We get underway right after this.
He's found the space, and he's found the back of the net.
Just a little off foot, thinking he's going to go far post. Not strong enough with his right hand.
Whips that one in. Far post, almost made him ends, and they have. He has the hat-trick. The second in his career. The third of the night. The hat-trick hero.
Talked about you're not going to be able to sustain that kind of pressure.
To the corner. Goes towards the near post. And you're at the angle, and what a goal! What a goal!
Friends, it's been a while since I've mentioned this, but the title of our podcast is From the Touchline. In soccer, the coaching happens from the sides, from the touchline. The sides of the field are the only place where a player can handle the ball to get it back into play, and it's also the place where the coach, the medical team, the backroom staff stand ready to support the team. As a chaplain, I serve in a way as a coach, as a supporter of the team, listening, seeing, guiding, coaching, not about soccer tactics or performance, but about spiritual things, about life things. So today we're talking about one of the biggest stressors that I've seen that can have a massive impact in someone's life. I see it many times with the athletes, the coaches, the staff members that I work with. You see, there's these on-the-field anxieties that tend to be related to goals scored or performance-related things. But then there's these off-the-field anxieties, and really they're not much different sometimes than what you or I might face on a given day. For example, a salesperson might have a sales goal that they have to achieve, they have to reach. Those are similar to the performance things that are on the field. But when you take the microscope and the pressure, the amplification that comes from being in such a publicly visible and results-driven industry as it relates to professional sport, it adds a tremendously unique layer to the complexities of these types of stresses. Let me give a fairly tame example of what I'm talking about. Retirement. Retirement is a fairly challenging time of transition for anyone. The leaving of a workplace, a vocation, an industry. It can really have someone asking questions about purpose and identity and finances. But take that same issue of retirement and put it down to someone in their late 20s or early 30s, the issues get amplified. Consider someone who is retiring from soccer, doing so after having poured years into their sport. Let's say a young person begins at the age of 5, and they end up retiring at the age of 25 or 30, maybe because of injury or something else. That's 20 to 25 years put into the work and effort to achieve and perform. And then when retirement comes, they may not have the same resources that someone who is, let's say, 65 or 70 does when they come to face retirement. I could probably share more anecdotes and examples, but if you're in soccer, you likely know about the various issues that you'll come across, and hopefully, whether you're a brand new rookie or a seasoned veteran, you're seeking out how can you develop resiliency for those times and moments when you might be faced with some of these issues. Now, retirement is something that comes at the end, and usually we try to put that off and not think about a change or transition into a different career. But we have other issues that create stress for us: injury, job loss, contract ending, career ending, relationships that happen, and more. For those in soccer, I want to share here in our last week, focusing in on mental health and faith, a particular passage from the Bible, the book of Romans. And I think it offers some important guidance when it comes to our mental health and our resiliency. So let me read Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I'm going to read this in the NIV and then walk through it a bit to offer some insight and encouragement for the podcast today. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 in the NIV. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Many times as Christians, and when it comes to life in general, we are seeking direction. We're looking for guidance. Should I move here? Should I marry this person? Should I accept this contract? Should I go to college or stay in a professional player development pathway? When surgery comes, should I have a cadaver replacement or a patellar tendon replacement? When it comes to making some of those decisions, it can feel overwhelming and we can feel intimidated to choose, especially if we've been hurt or burned in the past, we have a bad experience. So I want to begin by starting at the end of this passage that I just shared. Listen to these words. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. The key word here is then. It points us to what's been previously said. Then acts almost like an equal sign. 1 + 1, then 2, it equals 2. And while it's not as formulaic as math, it does highlight that there are some ways for us to know what God's will is for our lives. Also, too, these descriptors of God's will, good, pleasing, perfect. To know God's will for our lives can relieve so much mental and spiritual anxiety. And even understanding that God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect can help us when we're in distress because we can understand something different about our situation. We can see purpose in the midst of even pain. We can move away from fear and anxiety that can come from decision making. Now, I want to make a comment that sometimes, and in certain Christian circles, we can get a bit more into anxiety with decision making because we might question whether something is part of God's perfect will, his perfect plan. I remember growing up, someone gave me this illustration of a target and a bullseye. And they told me, they said, hey, in the direct center of the bullseye, this is the center of God's perfect will. Well, as a closet perfectionist, well, maybe I'm not so closet perfectionist, but as a type 1 Enneagram personality, to understand that there is a point of perfection wasn't exactly helpful for my spiritual life and journey, and certainly not for my anxiety. If you've ever shot a bow and arrow or played a game of darts, you know direct center bullseye is difficult to achieve. Only the best, only the professionals achieve it. And often, even for us that are attempting, it's rarely achieved. So for me, there was a pent-up anxiety about hitting dead center, whether it was about where I ought to go to school or my job and career direction or whom I should marry. There was this lingering question always of, yeah, but is this God's perfect dead center of the bullseye will? I think sometimes we get confused between God's plan and God's will. It might be easier to think about God's will in a different way than the bullseye. Martin Luther, the sort of founder of the Protestant Reformation, made a distinction between God's hidden will and his revealed will. God's hidden will entails the parts of God that he chooses not to tell us for one reason or another. Maybe it's simply we're not ready for it. We couldn't comprehend or understand it. Or maybe it's simply that God chooses to keep it from us. As an illustration, I think of some of those Hollywood movies where someone finds out they're going to die in a certain way. And the character in the film does everything they can do to avoid it, but inevitably, the Hollywood scriptwriters write in an unforeseen twist, and it leads them to that ultimate moment. Now, if we as humans could look into the future and know it, we might do a lot of work and have a lot more increased anxiety to avoid things because we would become so paralyzed to avoid the pain, to avoid, really what happens through growth or the journey and the joy that comes through all those other discovery points of life. God's revealed will, though, tells us the things that God finds pleasing and good. So let's transition from the hidden will to the revealed will. God's revealed will shows us what God appreciates and enjoys. It tells us attributes and characteristics of God. Simply put, if there's two opportunities in front of us, let's say there's two really good contracts with maybe even our favorite European team. If these things don't entail sin, then a choice lies before us, and we can know with confidence that we might make the choice for either contract and either team, and it would be equally pleasing to the Lord. It's the Lord's gift to us in a way. It's God's gift to us to say, I love you, I care about you, and I want you to experience joy. Well, I feel like I've spent like half the pod talking about God's will. Let's take a short break. I want to hear from our friend Brooke Ewert and the Rocky Mountain Sports Counseling Center, and we'll be right back.
Hello, this is Brooke Ewert, founder and director of the Rocky Mountain Sports Counseling Center. Athletes at all levels struggle with different mental health issues at different times in their sports journeys and careers. Myself and my team of licensed professional counselors at Rocky Mountain Sports Counseling Center stand ready to offer you and your family the help and support that you need. Our team is available for on-site and remote counseling support. Learn more by visiting our website at RockyMountainSportsCounselingCenter.com. You can email or call me or a member of our counseling team. Reach out to us today to get started on a pathway toward recovering and growing your mental health strength and resiliency. Rocky Mountain Sports Counseling Center, supporting athletes as they work through mental health crisis, injury, and retirement.
Well, hopefully that little discourse on the will of God has been somewhat helpful. There's a lot more that could be said, and probably some nuances and questions that arise in your mind. But to sum it up, God's revealed will is pleasing. It's good, it's perfect. We can know it, we can feel it, and it's for our enjoyment. It can give us a great peace of mind to know those things. But that comes into the final analysis. There are some steps that we have to do to get there. And let me talk about those next. So the first is we have this command. Let me reread Romans 12:1. Paul's writing here. He says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." So a first step. It's really coming to know and understand God's will. In order to do those things, it takes a step of surrender. Surrender. This is massively important. The way that we're created, the way we're wired, we want control. We want to manage ourselves. We want to manage our situations. We want to manage every aspect of our lives. Athletes, you have a desire to manage your progression, the pathway, as much as you can. Coaches, managers, tasked with leading a team, getting results. There's even a progression of coaching and playing philosophy that has to be massaged and managed. I could go on with the examples, but suffice it to say that one of the first steps towards seeking and discovering God's will is an act of surrender and a dedication of our entire being to God. I want to share a bit of my own story here to illustrate this. When I was younger, a teenager, I had a strong desire to be an officer in the U.S. Army. And I worked toward this end. I sought out a nomination for the military academy. I was readying myself for the challenge. But then I recall a speaker at a youth event, youth congress, and he was saying something like this: until you give God the little things in your life, how can you expect him to do big things? Now, up to that point, my dream was all about this imagined military life, this career, this thing that I felt called to, that I was attracted to, that I thought, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I was wired to be, how I was made to be. And I thought, this is what God wants me to do. But in that moment, though, after hearing that speaker, and I realized this dream of going to West Point Military Academy, being in the Army, this dream is a pretty big thing. I should surrender it to the Lord. Now, I didn't, in a moment, I remember I went forward, I prayed, I said, God, this thing, it feels bigger than a little thing, but let me give it to you and let me see what you want out of this. Now, I didn't give up on that dream in that moment. I still worked towards the nomination, toward the military academy. But in a posture of surrender and dedication, I essentially said, God, you take this thing. I think this is what I want, but I want more of what you want than what I want. And that led me on a journey that's led me here today as a volunteer chaplain in professional soccer and developing out other volunteer chaplains in soccer. Could there be anything more different, more crazy? But today I look back on that desire as a young person. It wasn't a bad desire. It wasn't unholy or sinful or wrong. But I can definitively say that God knew me better than I knew myself in those early days and moments, and still does. And in the surrendering and offering of my life in service to God, rather than in service to the military or to the country, I've discovered that good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, not that it's been easy, and this is what gets into what we might say is step 2, or at least as part of the command that we're given here in Romans 12, verse 2. And Paul writes, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Do not conform, but be transformed. It's a twofold command. Don't conform, be transformed. Conformity to the pattern of this world is to be resisted, to be avoided. When I think about conformity, I think about the mannequins that the team uses for set pieces and drills. These plastic, human-shaped, human-sized pieces are literally spiked into the ground and they just stand there, motionless unless they're hit by an in-swinging ball or shot. This for me is a picture of conformity. There's a mold at some factory somewhere churning out these human-like pieces that are placed in different spots and areas around the field, and they just stand there. So what are the patterns of the world? How do we recognize them? Well, in some ways, I think it feels pretty easy sometimes to detect a pattern of the world. Look around and ask yourself, what is everyone around me doing? Today, sometimes I look around, there's a lot of heads down and people are into their smartphones. Today, when we look around, there's a lot of screen time and devices that bringing entertainment and information into our lives. I remember as a kid, another pattern of the world. Growing up, people would talk about the American dream. It was this idea that everyone ought to strive for owning a house, 2 cars, and 1.5 kids. We could say that's a pattern. Right now in professional sport, a pattern, if you will, is for athletes to work on building their own brand, to cultivate a large following on social media, to kind of find these other income and revenue streams by creating this identity that's kind of bigger than their own sport. At a glance, these things might seem harmless. I mean, is there anything inherently wrong with owning a house, 2 cars, and having 1.5 kids? Is it bad to have 1 million followers on Instagram? Nah, probably not necessarily. But we don't often realize the mental health and the spiritual health cost of pursuing those worldly patterns. What we often don't address or look at is that owning that house in a particular part of town might mean both parents are working full-time jobs, and this coming at the expense of being home and being together with the 1.5 kids. Having 2 cars isn't a bad thing. I have 3 right now in my family. But if the 2 cars are so over the family budget, again, that mom and dad have to work extra or work extra gig jobs to afford it, maybe it is. Let's shift to social media. Not bad to have 1 million followers, maybe earn that extra income as an influencer, right? Well, what happens when the followers become haters because we fail to perform or fail to succeed? The social media criticisms and abuses can be so tremendous and do so much damage to our mental and spiritual health. Is it really worth the price? And so Paul writes to the Romans, don't get sucked into the trap, into the conformity to the world patterns. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, the word for transform here is not a one-off event. It's not a one and done. It's a continual transformation, a continual transfiguration. It's something that goes on really for the entirety of our lives. This word that's used for transform is used when it's also used in other texts in the Bible when they're talking about Jesus when he was transfigured in front of his best friend's eyes on the Mount of Transfiguration. It's also used elsewhere to describe Christians who are undergoing a process, a transformation process. Many people think that when we get to heaven, that's the point in time when we're going to be radically changed. But the truth of the matter is that the transformation that God is doing, that he desires to do in our lives, begins now, here and now, on earth. It begins with those who have an openly surrendered life. to those that have offered their lives, their bodies even, as a sacrifice for him to begin to do his work. And there's this internal spiritual transformation. A physical one is still to come, but God begins doing that work inside of us now. I can confidently share that the dreams that I had as a kid of being a military officer were gradually shaped and transformed as I surrendered and offered myself to God. I have seen in my own life a transformative work that was going on that I understand totally different today. Some of you have heard me talk of St. Martin, the founder of Chaplains. I find it interesting that Martin was a soldier before he served God in vocational ministry. As the story goes, it was really his heart's desire all along to serve the Lord. And I liken my story very much to Martin's, but minus the experience of being a soldier. And I believe that God spared me from that experience because he knew it wasn't really what my heart was after. It wasn't really what I was made for or who God wanted me to be. But because I have seen God's goodness to me in this way, it gives me confidence and peace for the things that are in front of me today, for the doubts and the decisions, for the questions, for the unknowns. God and me have history, and I believe he'll continue leading me into his will, that good, pleasing, and perfect will. That good, pleasing, and perfect will that he wants me to see, to feel, and to experience. Well, friends, as we come to a close today, I want to encourage you during this last part of Mental Health Awareness Month of May. For the moments and things of life where the decisions seem overwhelming and foreboding, God's will is accessible to all of us. It begins with a surrendered posture and a position where we offer all of ourselves to God. It takes the work of resisting worldly conformity and undergoing a lifelong process of transformation. But as that transformation, as that transfiguration happens, we will see and know and experience the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. And there is such a peace that comes with that, a peace that covers us, heart, mind, and soul. Well, friends, it's been a privilege to be with you today. I'm Rev Brad, coming to you from the Touchline.